The sound of my own hurried footsteps echoed in the narrow alley as I tried to catch my breath. My mind reeled back to earlier that evening, to the moment everything began to unravel. It had started with a knock at my door. I was sitting in the dim living room, absently flipping through channels to drown out the deafening quiet of the house. Another lonely evening, I thought. The knock came suddenly, jolting me from my thoughts. It wasn't just any knock. It was desperate, almost frantic, as if whoever was outside was clinging to their last shred of hope. When I opened the door, there he was, a boy no older than 16, soaked to the bone, trembling in the cold. His face was pale, his eyes hollow yet pleading. He clutched a worn-out backpack against his chest like it contained his entire world. "Please," he'd said, his voice cracking. "I just need a place to stay for the night. Just one night." I hesitated. My instincts told me to shut the door and lock it, to avoid entangling myself in a situation that screamed trouble. But the fear in his eyes stopped me cold. It wasn't the kind of fear that came from being caught doing something wrong. It was deeper, rawer, as if he were running from something unimaginable. I'd asked him where his parents were, why he was out alone so late, but he avoided my questions, offering only vague responses. Against my better judgment, I let him in, handing him a blanket and motioning toward the couch. "You can sleep here tonight," I'd said, "but in the morning, we'll figure out where you can go." At first, he barely spoke, his wary eyes darting to every corner of the room, as if he expected someone to burst through the door. He said his name was Logan, but when I asked him more about himself, where he was from, why he had no place to go, he deflected, muttering, "It's complicated." I didn't press him. The weight of his exhaustion was visible in the way his shoulders slumped, the way he clung to the blanket like it was the only thing anchoring him to reality. He eventually fell asleep on the couch, though his sleep was restless. He murmured in his sleep, fragmented words I couldn't piece together, and every so often, he'd flinch as if reliving a nightmare. That was the calm before the storm. Hours later, the pounding on the door shattered the fragile quiet of the night. The voices from outside had made it clear they weren't friendly, and when the sound of glass breaking followed, I realized I just invited danger into my home. And now, here we were, running for our lives through the dark, deserted streets. As I stood leaning against the cold wall of the storage facility, my thoughts churned. Hours ago, I had opened my door to a frightened boy seeking refuge, and now, I was entangled in something far bigger and more dangerous than I could have imagined. Logan sat a few feet away, his knees pulled up to his chest, his breathing slow but uneven. I needed answers, real ones this time. No vague excuses or cryptic warnings. "Logan," I said, breaking the heavy silence. My voice was calm but firm. "If I'm going to help you, I need to know the truth. All of it." He didn't look at me right away, his gaze fixed on the ground. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his messy hair. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "Knowing the truth might put you in even more danger." "I'm already in danger," I snapped, frustration bubbling to the surface. "They smashed through my window, chased us through the streets, and who knows what they'll do if they catch us. So, stop protecting me and start explaining." Logan hesitated, his jaw clenching as though he was wrestling with himself. Finally, he spoke. "The men chasing us. They're part of a group called the Syndicate." The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. It sounded sinister enough to match the fear I'd seen in his eyes. "They're criminals," he continued. "Not just regular gangsters, though. They're organized, powerful. They deal in everything: drugs, weapons, money laundering. But what makes them dangerous isn't just what they do. It's how they do it. They don't leave loose ends. Ever." A chill ran down my spine. "And you're a loose end?" He nodded. "I was recruited when I was 10. My parents were gone, and I was living on the streets. They found me, gave me food, shelter, clothes. I thought I'd been saved. But it wasn't charity, it was an investment. They trained me, made me run errands, do small jobs. By the time I realized what I'd gotten into, it was too late. I was in deep." My stomach twisted as I listened. The more he spoke, the more the pieces fell into place. painting a picture of a boy who had been exploited, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. I wanted out, he continued, his voice shaking slightly. So I ran. I've been hiding for weeks, but they always find me. Always. His words settled over me like a heavy blanket. It was all so much, too much. I didn't know what I'd expected him to say, but it certainly wasn't this. And yet, as overwhelming as it was, I couldn't turn my back on him now. They're not going to stop, I said, more to myself than to him. Not unless we stop them first. Logan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. What? You can't be serious. These people are ruthless. You don't know what they're capable of. And I don't want to find out, I replied. But I'm not about to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. If there's a way to end this, we're going to find it. His expression shifted from shock to something I couldn't quite place. Gratitude, maybe, mixed with disbelief. You don't have to do this, he said softly. You've already done more than anyone else ever has. I'm not doing this for them, I said firmly. I'm doing it for me. And for you. We spent the next few hours planning our next steps. Logan explained that the syndicate had layers of operatives, from low-level enforcers to high-ranking lieutenants. If we were going to disappear for good, we needed to throw them off our trail, make them think Logan was no longer a threat. It was a dangerous plan, one that relied on deception, speed, and a little bit of luck. But as I looked at Logan, a boy who had been through more in his 16 years than most people experienced in a lifetime, I knew we didn't have any other choice. First thing tomorrow, I said, we're going to find a way out of the city. Do you know where the syndicate is based? He hesitated, then nodded. Their main operations are in the industrial district. But that place is crawling with guards. It's not like we can just walk in. We don't need to walk in, I said, an idea forming in my mind. We just need to make them think we did. Logan frowned. What are you talking about? You'll see, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As Logan drifted off, I sat with my back against the wall, my mind racing. The syndicate was dangerous, and taking them on felt like a suicide mission. But there was no turning back now. Whatever it took, I was going to protect Logan and myself. And if that meant bringing down a criminal empire, so be it. Little did I know, the next 24 hours would test every ounce of courage I had. And by the time it was over, neither of us would ever be the same. The morning air was cold and sharp as sunlight barely broke through the clouds. We had stayed hidden in the abandoned storage facility until the first light, taking turns keeping watch. Sleep had been impossible for me. My mind was consumed with questions, plans, and worst of all, fear. Logan, surprisingly, managed a few restless hours, though his face betrayed the exhaustion weighing on him. When he finally stirred awake, I had already gone over the plan in my head a dozen times, though even I wasn't convinced it would work. I needed to present it to him carefully. He had been on the run long enough to recognize a bad idea when he heard one, and my idea might seem reckless. We need to split up, I said, breaking the tense silence as he rubbed his eyes and stretched. His head snapped up. What? No, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. Just hear me out, I said, raising a hand to stop his protests. If we're together, we're a single, easy target. If they're tracking you, and it's clear they are, they'll expect you to stick with me. But if we split, they won't know who to follow. Logan shook his head, the panic visible in his expression. They won't just lose the trail. They're better than that. They have people everywhere. If we split up, it's over for me. That's why we make them think you've already left the city, I explained. We create a distraction, something big enough to convince them you're somewhere else. Meanwhile, I head in a different direction to draw attention away. His eyes narrowed as he considered my words, though I could see the doubt lingering. And what if they catch you? Do you know what these people do to anyone who crosses them? I met his gaze, forcing myself to sound braver than I felt. I'll take that chance. The goal is to buy you time, Logan. Time to get to this safe house you mentioned. You said it's in the mountains, right? If we plan this right, you can get there before they figure out we've tricked them. For a moment, Logan didn't respond. His jaw clenched, and he looked down, his hands curling into fists. Finally, he spoke. You don't owe me this. You've already done more than anyone else would. If they catch you, they won't, I said firmly, cutting him off. I've spent the last 3 years surviving on my own. I know how to handle myself. The lie rolled off my tongue too easily, but Logan didn't question it. He nodded reluctantly, though I could see the tension still etched into his features. Okay, but if we do this, I'm not letting you take all the risk. We spent the next several hours finalizing the plan. Logan explained the syndicate's tactics, how they used teams to cover multiple areas, how they communicated, and how they tracked their targets. It was chilling how much he knew, a testament to how deeply he'd been entrenched in their world. The first step was to make them believe Logan had left the city. He suggested planting false information, something subtle but convincing enough to lead them in the wrong direction. Do you know anyone who can help? Logan asked as we debated how to spread the fake lead. I hesitated. There was one person who came to mind, Jack, a former neighbor who owed me a favor. He worked at a bus station downtown, and if anyone could fabricate a believable trail, it was him. But reaching out to Jack would be risky. If the syndicate was monitoring us, any communication could tip them off. We'll have to be careful, I said. But I think I know someone who can help. Logan nodded. Let's do it. Reaching Jack was no small feat. The syndicate was likely patrolling the streets, so we avoided main roads and stuck to alleys and side paths. My heart pounded every time a car passed, but we made it to the bus station without incident. Jack was leaning against the ticket counter when I approached, his face lighting up in surprise when he saw me. Well, if it isn't the recluse herself, he said, grinning. What brings you to my neck of the woods? I need a favor, I said bluntly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Logan hung back, his hood pulled low over his face. Jack raised an eyebrow. This sounds serious. It is. I need you to create a paper trail, tickets, records, anything that makes it look like someone left the city on one of your buses. Can you do that? His smile faltered, replaced by a wary look. You're asking for something dangerous. Who's after you? Not me, I said quickly. A friend. He's in trouble, and this is the only way to keep him safe. Jack hesitated, his gaze shifting to Logan. He let out a long sigh, then nodded. Fine, but you owe me. Big time. Deal, I said, relief flooding through me. With Jack's help, we created a convincing trail that suggested Logan had boarded a bus headed to a neighboring city. Ticket stubs, surveillance footage, and even witness accounts were planted to support the story. It wasn't foolproof, but it was the best we could manage on short notice. As we left the bus station, I glanced at Logan. This is it. They'll take the bait, but we need to move fast. Logan's expression was a mix of determination and fear. I just hope it's enough. It will be, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. The clock was ticking, and the next phase of the plan was about to begin. There was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, we were in this together. We kept to the shadows as we made our way back to the storage facility to regroup. Every car that passed felt like a potential threat, every shadow a possible ambush. Logan's face was pale and taut with tension, his sharp eyes scanning our surroundings like a cornered animal. What happens if they don't take the bait? He asked, his voice hushed but tinged with fear. They will, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. They've been tracking you for weeks. They'll jump at the chance to get ahead of you. He nodded, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. To be honest, neither was I. By the time we reached the storage facility, the sun had climbed higher, casting harsh light on the crumbling walls and rusted metal doors. We slipped inside the same unit we'd used the night before, closing the door softly behind us. Logan sat down on the cold concrete floor, pulling his knees to his chest, while I leaned against the wall, my arms crossed tightly. How long do we wait? He asked after a moment. Not long, I said. We need to move before they figure out the trail is fake. If we stay in one place too long, we're sitting ducks. While we waited, the silence grew heavy between us. Logan fidgeted with the strap of his backpack, his eyes distant. I could tell he was wrestling with something, though I didn't press him. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You know, before all of this, I thought I'd have a normal life. School, friends, maybe even a family one day. Stupid. Huh. I looked at him, startled by the sudden vulnerability in his tone. That's not stupid, I said. It's what everyone wants. Not everyone, he muttered. The syndicate doesn't care about normal lives. They take kids like me, kids no one notices, and they turn us into tools. I spent years thinking I owed them something, that I was lucky they picked me. But all they did was ruin everything. His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on the danger we were in that I hadn't stopped to think about what Logan had lost. His childhood, his innocence, all of it had been stolen from him. I'm sorry, I said softly. You didn't deserve any of that. He shrugged, his expression hardening. Doesn't matter now. I can't change it. All I can do is survive. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I wanted to tell him that survival wasn't enough, that he deserved more than just running and hiding. But I didn't know how to say it, and part of me wondered if he'd even believe me. Our uneasy silence was shattered by the sound of tires screeching outside. My heart leapt into my throat as I motioned for Logan to stay quiet. We both pressed ourselves against the wall, straining to hear. Voices drifted in through the thin walls of the storage unit, gruff, clipped, and far too close for comfort. Spread out, one of them barked. He's got to be here somewhere. Logan's eyes met mine, wide with panic. I placed a finger to my lips, signaling him to stay still. My mind raced, searching for a way out. The back of the storage unit was solid concrete, no windows, no doors. The only way out was the way we came in. The footsteps grew louder, and I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. A shadow passed under the crack of the door, and I braced myself for the worst. Suddenly, a voice called out from the distance. Hey, over here. I think I saw something. The footsteps retreated as the men moved toward the distraction, their voices fading. I let out a shaky breath, my body trembling with adrenaline. We need to go. Now, I whispered, grabbing Logan's arm. He nodded, his face pale but determined. We slipped out of the storage unit and into the maze of alleys behind the facility, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. My mind raced as I tried to piece together our next move. The syndicate was closing in, and our options were running out. Once we were far enough from the storage facility, I pulled Logan into a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It was the kind of place where people minded their own business, and the hum of conversation would help mask ours. We need a car, I said as we slid into a booth near the back. Something to get us out of the city fast. Logan looked at me skeptically. You know how to hotwire a car? I raised an eyebrow. Do I look like I know how to hotwire a car? He smirked faintly, the first hint of humor I'd seen from him. Fair point. So what's the plan? I have a friend, I said, though the word felt a bit too generous. Her name's Clara. She owns a repair shop on the south side. If anyone can get us a ride, it's her. Logan frowned. Can you trust her? I hesitated. Clara and I hadn't spoken in years, not since Daniel's death. But if there was one thing I knew about her, it was that she had a soft spot for underdogs. And Logan was nothing if not an underdog. She owes me, I said finally. It's worth a shot. The repair shop was exactly how I remembered it. Cluttered, chaotic, and reeking of oil and grease. Cars in various states of disrepair were scattered around the lot, their hoods open like silent pleas for rescue. The rhythmic sound of a hammer echoed from the far corner of the garage, where Clara stood, her back to us, working on an engine. Clara, I called out, my voice cutting through the clatter. She straightened and turned, wiping her hands on a grease-stained rag. Her sharp blue eyes narrowed when she saw me, her expression unreadable. Well, look who decided to crawl out of her cave, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What brings you to my neck of the woods, Alexis? Trouble, I said bluntly, motioning to Logan, who was lingering just behind me. We need a car. Something untraceable. Her eyes flicked to Logan, then back to me. Untraceable? You realize that's not exactly a simple favor, right? I know, I said, stepping closer. But I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important. Clara crossed her arms, studying me for a long moment. Finally, she let out a heavy sigh. You're lucky I owe you. Follow me. Clara led us to a corner of the garage where an old but reliable sedan sat under a tarp. This beauty's been off the grid for years, she said, pulling the tarp back. No GPS, no trackers, no paper trail. Perfect for whatever mess you're in. Logan's eyes widened as he examined the car. This'll work, he said, nodding. Clara raised an eyebrow. He's chatty. He's cautious, I corrected. And with good reason. She didn't push for details, which I appreciated. Instead, she handed me the keys and leaned against the car, her expression serious. Listen, Alexis, I don't know what you're caught up in, but if it's bad enough that you're coming to me for help, it's bad enough to be careful. Watch your back. I will, I promised. Thank you, Clara. I mean it. She waved me off. Just don't get yourself killed. And if anyone comes asking, I've never seen you. We hit the road as soon as we left the shop, the city fading behind us as the miles stretched out ahead. Logan sat silently in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The tension in the car was palpable, but I didn't push him to talk. We were both too exhausted for conversation. After an hour of driving, I broke the silence. Do you know the exact location of this safe house? Logan nodded. It's a cabin near the base of the mountains, hidden in the woods. It's where some of us go when there's no other option. Some of you? I asked, glancing at him. He hesitated, then said, people like me, people who escaped. It's run by a guy named Victor. He used to be with the syndicate, but he got out years ago. Now he helps others disappear. I absorbed his words, filing away the name Victor. It sounded almost too good to be true, but at this point, I didn't have the luxury of doubt. If this Victor could keep Logan safe, it was worth the risk. By the time night fell, we were deep in rural territory, the city lights long behind us. The narrow road was lined with dense trees, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out the stars. I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. We were far from the syndicate's reach, but isolation came with its own dangers. Logan shifted in his seat, glancing at the rearview mirror. Do you think they're still following us? I don't know, I admitted, but we're not taking any chances. As if on cue, headlights appeared in the distance behind us. My grip on the wheel tightened as I watched the car approach. It was moving fast, too fast. Logan, I said, my voice low. We might have company. He turned to look, his eyes narrowing. It's them. I'm sure of it. My heart raced as the car closed the distance, its headlights glaring in the rearview mirror. Hold on, I said, slamming my foot on the gas. The sedan roared as it picked up speed, the engine straining against the incline of the road. The pursuing car stayed on our tail, its engine growling like a predator closing in on its prey. They're trying to ram us, Logan shouted as the car swerved closer. I jerked the wheel, narrowly avoiding the impact. Hang on, I shouted, my voice filled with panic and adrenaline. Ahead, the road curved sharply, and I took the turn at full speed. The tires screeched in protest, but the car held its grip. The pursuing vehicle wasn't as lucky. It overshot the turn, skidding off the road and into the trees with a deafening crash. I didn't stop to see if they were okay. I kept driving, the adrenaline coursing through me like fire. Logan let out a shaky breath, his hands gripping the seat tightly. That was too close, he said, his voice trembling. Tell me about it, I muttered, my own hands trembling on the wheel. We drove in silence for another hour, neither of us daring to relax completely. When we finally stopped for the night at a secluded rest area, the weight of everything that had happened crashed down on me. I slumped against the hood of the car, staring up at the dark sky. Logan joined me, his expression somber. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for dragging you into this. I shook my head. You didn't drag me into anything. I chose to help you, and I don't regret it. He looked at me, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Gratitude, maybe, or guilt. You're braver than anyone I've ever met, he said. I let out a humorless laugh. Brave isn't the word I'd use. Maybe not, he said. But it's the truth. The quiet rest area offered a false sense of security. Just as Logan and I began to settle, the sound of gravel crunching under tires broke the stillness. Headlights pierced the darkness, heading straight for us. Get in the car, I barked, yanking Logan by the arm. We scrambled into the sedan, and I threw it into gear, peeling out of the rest area before the approaching vehicles could close the gap. 2 black SUVs tailed us, their engines roaring like hounds on the scent of blood. They found us again, Logan shouted, his voice tight with panic. I didn't respond, my focus locked on the winding road ahead. The trees blurred past as I floored the gas pedal, the sedan protesting under the strain. One of the SUVs pulled alongside us, trying to force us off the road. Brace yourself, I yelled, swerving sharply to avoid the impact. The SUV clipped the edge of the sedan, sending a jolt through the vehicle. Logan gripped the door handle, his face pale. Do something, he shouted. I spotted a narrow dirt path branching off the main road and made a split-second decision. Yanking the wheel hard to the right, I veered onto the path. The sedan bumped and jolted as we tore through the uneven terrain, the SUVs struggling to follow. The dirt path wound deeper into the forest, the trees closing in on either side. The headlights of the SUVs were still visible behind us, but the narrow path slowed them down. They won't give up, Logan said, his voice grim. They never do. We'll see about that, I muttered, my eyes scanning the path ahead. Up ahead, the dirt path split into 2. Without hesitation, I took the left fork, hoping to throw them off. Moments later, the sound of one SUV peeling off in the opposite direction confirmed they'd taken the bait. But the second SUV stayed on us, its headlights bouncing wildly over the uneven terrain. We need to lose them, Logan shouted. Spotting a cluster of thick trees just off the path, I slammed the brakes and killed the headlights. The sedan slid to a stop, hidden in the shadows. I motioned for Logan to stay quiet as the SUV roared past, its driver oblivious to our sudden disappearance. Once the sounds of the SUV faded, I exhaled a shaky breath and turned to Logan. We have to keep moving. They'll double back when they realize they've lost us. We can't keep running like this, he said. They'll keep finding us. Before I could respond, a low voice broke through the silence. You need help? We spun around to see a man stepping out from behind a tree, a rifle slung over his shoulder. His weathered face was partially obscured by the shadows, but there was something about him that exuded calm authority. Who are you? I demanded, my voice sharp. Victor, the man said, his eyes settling on Logan. You must be the one they're hunting. Logan's jaw dropped. How do you know who I am? I've been watching, Victor replied. I know the syndicate's tactics, and I know how to get you out of this mess. Victor led us deeper into the forest, where a concealed cabin sat nestled among the trees. Inside, he handed us both cups of water and gestured for us to sit. You're not safe yet, he began. The syndicate has eyes everywhere, but there's a way to disappear for good. A network of safe houses that can keep you off their radar. Why would you help us? I asked, still wary. Because I've been where you are, Victor said, his gaze dark. I was one of them once. I know what they'll do if they catch you, and I won't let that happen. Logan leaned forward. What do we need to do? Victor outlined the plan. A decoy trail to lead the syndicate away, a switch to an unmarked vehicle, and finally a trek through the mountains to the main safe house. It was risky, but it was the only option. As dawn broke, we set out with Victor's guidance. The decoy trail worked initially, but it wasn't long before the syndicate caught wind of our movements. By midday, they were back on our trail, their persistence relentless. This way, Victor shouted, leading us through a narrow mountain pass. The rough terrain slowed the SUVs chasing us, but they were still gaining. Keep going, I urged Logan, who was struggling to keep up. Ahead, the pass opened into a steep incline. Victor pointed to a hidden path that veered off into the dense woods. Go, I'll hold them off. No, Logan protested. You'll get killed. Just go, Victor barked, raising his rifle. With no time to argue, I grabbed Logan's arm and pulled him up the path. The sound of gunfire echoed behind us as Victor engaged the syndicate's men, buying us precious time. By the time we reached the cabin Victor had described, night had fallen. Logan was limping, his face pale from exhaustion, but we'd made it. The cabin was small but sturdy, stocked with supplies and equipped with a shortwave radio. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. "We're safe here," I said, though my voice wavered. "At least for now." Logan sank onto a cot, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Do you think Victor made it?" I hesitated. "I don't know, but he gave us a chance. We can't waste it." Over the next few days, we settled into a tense routine. The syndicate's presence in the area diminished, their search growing colder with each passing day. Logan began to relax, though the weight of what we'd been through lingered. One evening, as we sat by the cabin's small fireplace, Logan spoke. "Thank you for everything." "You don't need to thank me," I said. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" he asked. "Live. For yourself, not for them." He nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "I will." The quiet inside the cabin was both a blessing and a curse. Days passed without any sign of the syndicate, but the tension never truly left. I found myself jumping at every rustle of leaves, every distant sound that could be mistaken for approaching footsteps. Logan, too, was restless. Though he tried to mask it, I could see the unease in his eyes. "Do you think this is really over?" he asked one evening as we sat by the fireplace, the flames casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls. "I don't know," I admitted, my gaze fixed on the fire. "But for now, we're safe." "That's more than we had a week ago." He nodded but didn't look convinced. "They don't give up. Not until they've eliminated every loose end." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "Then we make sure we're not loose ends anymore." Victor said this network is strong. If we follow his advice, we might just disappear for good. It was on the 5th day at the cabin when the shortwave radio crackled to life. Logan and I froze, exchanging wary glances before I reached for the receiver. A man's voice came through, rough and strained. "This is Victor. If you're hearing this, it means I'm still standing." "Barely." "Victor," Logan said, grabbing the radio. "You made it." "Not for long," Victor replied. "Listen carefully. The syndicate isn't done. They've shifted their focus, trying to cut off escape routes. You need to leave the cabin tonight. Head north. There's another safe house deeper in the mountains." "North?" I asked, taking the receiver. "We've barely recovered. Is it safe?" "It's safer than staying where you are," Victor said firmly. "Trust me. You've got a head start, but they'll figure out where you are soon. Don't wait for them to come knocking." The radio went silent, and a heavy weight settled in my chest. Leaving the cabin meant stepping back into uncertainty, but staying put wasn't an option. The night air was cold and biting as Logan and I packed what little we had and set out. Victor had left detailed directions for the northern safe house, but the path was treacherous. Steep inclines, narrow ledges, and dense woods that seemed to close in around us. "We should rest," Logan said after hours of climbing, his breath visible in the cold air. Just for a minute, I hesitated but nodded. We found a flat patch of ground and sat, the weight of our journey pressing down on us. The silence of the mountains was eerie, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. "Do you think we'll ever stop running?" Logan asked quietly. "I hope so," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "We just need to make it to the next safe house. One step at a time." As dawn broke, we reached a clearing that opened onto a narrow valley. The air felt heavier, and an uneasy feeling settled over me. Logan must have felt it too because he stopped abruptly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "What is it?" I asked, my voice low. "I don't know," he said, his tone cautious. "Something feels off." That's when I saw it. A faint glint of sunlight reflecting off something metallic in the distance. A vehicle parked at the edge of the valley. "They're here," I whispered, my stomach dropping. Logan grabbed my arm. "We need to double back." But as we turned, the sound of voices carried through the trees, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. "Going somewhere?" a deep voice drawled. We froze as three men stepped out of the shadows, their weapons trained on us. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt Logan tense beside me. Before I could speak, a shot rang out, startling the men and sending birds scattering from the treetops. From behind the trees, Victor emerged, his rifle aimed steadily at the group. "Drop your weapons," he commanded, his voice cold and unyielding. The men hesitated, but Victor didn't. Another shot rang out, grazing the ground near their feet. "I won't ask again." The standoff was tense, but finally, the men lowered their guns. Victor motioned for us to move. "Go. Now." "Victor, come with us," Logan urged, his voice desperate. Victor shook his head. "I'll hold them off. You two need to get to the safe house." "There's no time to argue." Reluctantly, we obeyed, running as Victor kept his weapon trained on the syndicate's men. The last thing I saw before we disappeared into the trees was Victor standing tall, his rifle steady, ready to buy us time with his life if necessary. We reached the northern safe house just as night fell. It was smaller and more secluded than the first, tucked deep within a dense thicket of trees. Inside, we found supplies and a handwritten note from Victor, detailing the next steps to ensure our safety. Logan collapsed onto the cot, his face pale and drawn. "Do you think he made it?" I didn't know how to answer. Victor had risked everything for us, and the thought of leaving him behind filled me with guilt. But we couldn't dwell on it now. Survival was all that mattered. Over the next few days, we began to adapt to life at the new safe house. Logan was quieter than usual, his thoughts clearly with Victor. But gradually, the tension began to ease. The syndicate's presence in the area seemed to wane, and for the first time in weeks, we felt a fragile sense of peace. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, Logan spoke. "We can't keep hiding forever." I looked at him, surprised by the determination in his voice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to fight back," he said. "Not just for us, but for everyone they've hurt." Victor showed us that it's possible. His words ignited something in me, a spark of hope, of purpose. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop running and start fighting. Months later, the syndicate was no longer a shadow looming over our lives. Logan and I, along with others from Victor's network, worked tirelessly to dismantle their operations piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and the scars of our journey remained, but we found strength in each other, and in the fight for justice. Victor's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. He'd given us more than a chance to survive. He'd given us a reason to keep going. And as Logan and I stood at the edge of the forest, watching the sun rise over the mountains, I knew we'd finally found something worth fighting for: freedom.